Hello class, today we're going to talk about the domain and range of inverses. So a quick little recap of domain and range. I know it's been a while since Algebra 1-2, since we talked about it, but the domain is all the possible x values that a function can have, while the range are all the possible y values that a function can have. So when you think about domain, we think about left and right. And when we think about range, we think up and down. And specifically, when we're trying to state what a domain and range is, we're trying our best to bound it. Like, for instance, is there a number very far left or is there a number very far right that I can say, okay, the function won't go past these two? Or up and down. Is there a place on the bottom that I can bound it and a top I can bound it? It will never go past these points. But a lot of times we can't bound them, and we'll just use infinity for that if it goes on forever. So let's just kind of look at a visual here, and this has nothing to do with what's written over here. We'll get to that in a second. Let's say that we have a function that looks like this, right? And I want to find what is the domain and what is the range of this function. Well, domain. Well, first, remember that this goes on forever in this direction, this goes on forever in that direction. So where can I bound it? Where on the left can I say this function will never reach this spot, and on the right this function will never reach this spot? Well, knowing that this goes out and down forever, there's no place that I can bound it going left or right that I can say with certainty that it won't exist at this spot. So the domain here is from negative infinity to positive infinity. Now, well, I'll get into that in a second. And then the range, where can I bound it from the bottom and the top? Well, the bottom, this goes down and out forever, so I can't bound it on the bottom, so it goes from negative infinity. But what about the top? Well, it looks like to me that the top, it'll end right around here, right? The function will never exist above this orange line. And that orange line is at x equals 3. Now, notice that I did a bracket here and a parenthesis here. The difference is that when a function actually reaches a point, it's included, we use a bracket. If it gets infinitely close to that point but doesn't reach it, we use a parenthesis. Okay? And whenever we deal with infinity, we always use parentheses. Okay? So let's talk about the domain and range of an inverse now. So the domain and range of inverses are switched. So this is a very important thing to remember. And that is, say if we have this function f of x equals 2 to the x, and I'm telling you its domain goes from negative infinity to positive infinity, and its range goes from 0 to infinity. Now, I am using not a bracket here, I'm using a parenthesis because it doesn't actually reach 0. It gets infinitely close to 0 but doesn't actually reach it. So this is the domain and range of my original function. Well, the inverse, the domain is going to become the range, and the range is going to become the domain. So notice when the domain was negative 2 and positive infinity, the range of my inverse is now negative 2 and positive infinity. The range of my original function was from 0 to infinity. Now the domain of my inverse is from 0 to infinity. So they switch. All right? I'm taking a look at an example here. Squared functions, quadratics. The domain goes from negative to positive infinity, and the range goes from 0 to infinity. And I have the bracket here because with quadratics it actually includes that value. So when I take my inverse, the domain, actually goofed. This should be D, and this should be R. The domain and range are switched. So the domain becomes the range of the inverse, and the range becomes the domain of, or the range becomes the domain's inverse. No, the inverse is domain. There we go. Got it. Awesome. So here's also a rule of thumb that you might want to write down. And a general rule of thumb It basically, a rule of thumb, if you don't know what it is, it's kind of a rule, but there are a lot of exceptions. So notice note that in all of this there are exceptions, okay? So generally, a linear function's domain and range will be from negative infinity to positive infinity. That is the case with linear functions. Linear functions are just functions whose x is to the first power. Quadratics, domain and range. The domain, quadratic is a squared function. The domain is always from negative to positive infinity, and its range is either from some number to infinity or from negative infinity to some number. Okay, and they include those numbers, so we put brackets there. Exponentials the domain generally goes from negative to positive infinity, and the range will go from a number to infinity or from negative infinity to a number, and exponentials don't include that number. So we'll just write it like this. So when you're asked to find, on your worksheet, when you're asked to find the function's domain and range, I would just hold on. My brain just exploded. On your paper, when you're asked to find the inverse's domain and range, and you're not given it, what you'd want to do, so steps to find inverses D and R, you'll want to graph the f of x to find D and R. And step 2, you'll want to switch D and R to get f inverse of x. So, nope, that's an R. So graphs are your friends. So on your paper, graph the function and try to find its domain and range, and from there go find the domain and range of the inverse. So let me know if you have any questions finding that domain and range, because it can be very tricky. So I will be here for you. Let me know if you all have any questions, and have a good day.